Sarah Mitchell wiped down the last table in the corner of Riverside Café, her feet aching after another long shift. The afternoon sun filtered through the industrial windows, casting long shadows across the worn wooden floors. She'd been working double shifts for 3 months now, trying to save enough money to finish her nursing degree. The cafe wasn't fancy, but it had character. Exposed brick walls, mismatched furniture, and the kind of honest coffee that kept regular customers coming back. Sarah loved the place, even when her tips barely covered her bus fare home. She was about to flip the sign to closed when she noticed him through the window. A man in tattered clothes, his face weathered and his eyes tired, stood outside looking at the menu board with a longing that tugged at her heart. Sarah had seen him before, sleeping in the doorway of the abandoned building across the street. The owner, Mr. Patterson, usually chased away anyone who looked like they couldn't pay. But Mr. Patterson had left early today, complaining about a dentist appointment. The man's hand went to his pocket, and Sarah could see him counting coins in his palm. His shoulders sagged as he realized he didn't have enough. Before she could think twice about it, Sarah opened the door. "We're about to close," she said gently. "But I just made a fresh pot of coffee and there's a sandwich that'll just go to waste. Would you like it?" The man's eyes widened, a mixture of surprise and wariness. "I can pay," he said quietly, holding out his handful of coins. "I have $1.63. "Tell you what," Sarah said with a warm smile. "You keep that money. This food was going in the trash anyway. Come on in before the coffee gets cold." The man hesitated at the threshold as if crossing into the warm cafe might break some unspoken rule. But hunger and the cold evening air won out, and he stepped inside. Sarah guided him to a corner booth and brought him a steaming cup of coffee. "A turkey sandwich and a slice of apple pie." "I'm Sarah," she said, sitting across from him for a moment. "My name is James," he replied, his voice rough from disuse. "James Whitmore." As James ate slowly, savoring each bite, Sarah found herself talking to him. Not with pity, but with genuine interest. She asked about his day, about how he was managing the approaching winter. James spoke carefully, choosing his words with a precision that surprised her. He talked about the library where he spent his mornings reading, about the changing seasons in the park, about small beauties that most people overlooked. "You have a kind heart?" James said finally, looking at her with eyes that seemed to see past her worn uniform and tired face. "That's rare these days. Everyone deserves kindness," Sarah replied simply. "We all fall on hard times. Doesn't make us less human." James nodded slowly, something unreadable crossing his features. "No, it doesn't." After he finished eating, Sarah packed him another sandwich for later and refilled his coffee in a to-go cup. James tried again to give her his handful of coins, but she gently closed his fingers around them. "Save it for when you really need it," she said. James stood at the door for a long moment, looking back at her. "Thank you, Sarah. You've given me more than you know." That night, Sarah rode the bus home to her tiny studio apartment, her wallet lighter than it should be. She'd used her own tip money to cover the cost of James's meal, knowing Mr. Patterson would notice if the register didn't balance. But as she looked out at the city lights, she felt a warmth that had nothing to do with the heater rattling overhead. The next morning, Sarah arrived for her shift to find an unusual scene. A sleek black car was parked outside the cafe, and inside Mr. Patterson was practically bouncing with nervous energy. "Sarah, there you are," he said, his voice strained. "We have a very important visitor today, a potential investor. I need everything to be perfect." Sarah tied on her apron and got to work, making sure every table gleamed and the coffee was fresh. The morning rush came and went, but there was no sign of any investor. Then, just before noon, the door opened. Sarah looked up from the espresso machine and froze. Standing in the doorway was James, but not the James she'd met yesterday. This James wore an impeccably tailored charcoal suit, his hair neatly trimmed, his shoes polished to a shine. But his eyes were the same, kind and knowing. "Hello, Sarah," he said quietly. Mr. Patterson rushed forward, his hand extended. Mr. Whitmore, welcome to Riverside Café. I'm Gerald Patterson, the owner. We spoke on the phone. Sarah's mind reeled. Mr. Whitmore, the investor. But how could that be? James shook Mr. Patterson's hand briefly, but his attention remained on Sarah. Actually, Mr. Patterson, there's been a change of plans. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a folder. I'm not interested in investing in your cafe. Mr. Patterson's face fell. But I thought, I'm interested in buying it, James continued. Outright. The lawyers have drawn up the papers. I'm prepared to offer you significantly more than market value on the condition that the sale closes today. Mr. Patterson sputtered, his eyes going wide. Today? But I need time to consider. The offer expires in 1 hour, James said calmly. Take it or leave it. 45 minutes later, Mr. Patterson walked out of the cafe, a substantially wealthier man, looking dazed but pleased. The remaining customers had been politely asked to leave, and Sarah stood alone with James in the empty cafe. I don't understand, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. James sat down at the same corner booth where he'd eaten his meal the night before. Sarah, I need to tell you a story. 5 years ago, I was where you are now. Working hard, trying to build something, believing in kindness. Then my business partner betrayed me, framed me for financial crimes I didn't commit. By the time I proved my innocence, I'd lost everything. My company, my home, my wife, my reputation. Sarah sank into the seat across from him, listening intently. I spent 2 years on the streets, James continued. 2 years learning what it's like to be invisible, to have people look through you as if you don't exist. I was angry at first, then depressed. I'd given up on humanity. But you're clearly doing well now, Sarah said. James nodded. 6 months ago, an old friend found me. He'd never believed the charges against me, and he'd been working to clear my name completely. Once my reputation was restored, I discovered that some of my investments had actually grown during my absence. I'm wealthier now than I ever was before. So why were you outside my cafe yesterday dressed like... Sarah stopped herself. Like a homeless man? James finished gently. Because I needed to know something. I've been testing people, Sarah. Going to businesses dressed as I was yesterday, seeing how I'm treated. Most places won't even let me through the door. Those that do serve me grudgingly with disgust barely hidden. I've been to over 30 establishments in this city. He looked at her with an expression of deep respect. You're the first person who treated me like a human being, who gave without expecting anything in return. Who sat with me and talked to me like I mattered. Sarah felt tears prickling her eyes. Anyone would have... No, James interrupted firmly. They wouldn't. Trust me, I know. You did something extraordinary, Sarah, and you did it when you could least afford to. I watched you use your own tip money to pay for my meal. I saw you give me food that wasn't actually going to waste, that you probably planned to take home for your own dinner. Sarah looked down at her hands, embarrassed. I own this place now, James said. And I'd like to offer you a position, not as a waitress, but as manager. The pay is $60,000 a year with full benefits and tuition assistance. You'll have the authority to hire your own staff and shape this cafe into something special. Sarah's head snapped up, her heart pounding. James, I can't. You can, he said. And you will. Because you understand something that most people forget. That every person who walks through that door has a story, has dignity, deserves respect. This cafe is going to be a place where everyone is welcome, where kindness is the first thing on the menu. But I don't have management experience, Sarah protested. You have something more important, James replied. You have character. The rest we can teach you. I have excellent people who can help with business operations and finance. What I need from you is to keep being exactly who you are, to create a culture where people are valued. Sarah's mind was spinning. $60,000 a year, benefits, tuition assistance. She could finish her nursing degree without working herself to exhaustion. She could actually save money, maybe even help her mother with her medical bills. Why are you doing this? She asked. James smiled, and for the first time she saw the weight he'd been carrying lift slightly from his shoulders. Because when you have nothing, Sarah, you learn what really matters. And when you get a second chance, you learn to recognize it in others. You gave me more than a meal yesterday. You gave me back my faith in humanity. He stood and extended his hand. So what do you say? Will you help me turn this place into something that matters? Sarah took his hand, tears streaming down her face. Yes, absolutely. Over the following months, Riverside Cafe was transformed. The menu expanded to include pay-what-you-can options for those struggling financially. A corner was set aside with free coffee and pastries every morning for anyone who needed them, no questions asked. Sarah hired staff who shared her values, people who'd overcome their own hardships and understood the power of compassion. The cafe became known throughout the city as a place where everyone belonged, where the homeless man and the business executive sat side by side, where dignity was never measured by the size of your wallet. James came in every morning, sitting in his corner booth with his coffee and newspaper. He'd made other investments too, other businesses built on the same principle, that kindness isn't weakness, and that how we treat the most vulnerable among us defines who we really are. Sarah finished her nursing degree and began working part-time at the community health clinic while still managing the cafe. She never forgot the night she'd given a meal to a stranger, never forgot how one small act of kindness had transformed both of their lives. And sometimes, late at night when the cafe was quiet, she'd sit in that corner booth and marvel at the path her life had taken. She'd learned that the greatest treasures aren't found in bank accounts or resumes, but in the connections we make and the compassion we show. James had been right about one thing. Everyone who walked through that door had a story. And now, thanks to a sandwich and a cup of coffee shared with kindness, some of those stories had the chance for a much happier ending. If this story reminded you that kindness always comes back around, please like, share, and subscribe for more stories about compassion, second chances, and the unexpected ways our actions ripple through the world. Comment below about a time someone's small act of kindness made a big difference in your life. Your story might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today.